Hello, everyone who's listening. Thank you for joining. This is another session of the Tamil Innovators Spotlight. So the Tamil Innovators Spotlight is an online series which puts the spotlight on individuals from the global Tamil community who are building great products, services, and initiatives. Our latest event is brought to you in partnership with mystartupdojo.com and tamilculture.com. And my name is Ara Yempra, and I'm one of the co-founders of tamilculture.com, and I'm just stepping in for Anjali today to be the host. And I also host my own podcast called The Tamil Creator as well. I am super excited to welcome our featured speaker today, Prashanth Balasubramanian, CEO of Y Combinator backed startup Lastbit. And we'll share in the recap and show notes kind of the URL to kind of check out more information about the company. And, before we kind of get into it, I'll do a quick intro on some of the key things around Prashanth, and obviously we'll learn a bit more as we kind of move forward. But Prashanth is an early Bitcoiner and developer. So for those of you listening, interested about Bitcoin, blockchain, all that stuff, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but he'll kind of clarify that. He left ETH Zurich in Switzerland while he was in the middle of his master's program to build Lastbit. So that's dedication to kind of, go to the States. As you can kind of see in his t-shirt, he's wearing a Berkeley Skydeck t-shirt. So that was one of the first programs he got into, and then the Y Combinator program. And he loves working with Bitcoin. And, while playing on an European tour in a heavy metal band, he kind of learned the horrors of kind of legally having access to an Indian bank account, but trying to use multiple currencies on a daily basis. And it's kind of one of the many sparks which kind of got him interested in Bitcoin and, some of the benefits of the technology. So we'll kind of now get into it and welcome Prashanth. So Prashanth, for, those of us or those of people kind of listening, why don't you tell them a bit about yourself, your family, your upbringing, kind of before we kind of get into the fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the kind words and the introduction. Well, so I grew up in India. I mean, I was born in Bangalore. I lived here, did my schooling here for the first about 18, 20 years of my life. Then I moved to Vellore, which is a small city near Chennai, to study at VIT, and I studied computer science. I've been studying computer science since like a young age, and my brother, I have an older brother who's also like super into computers, and like he kind of dragged me into the idea of like programming and working with computer like super young. We used to build PCs and stuff like that. So we both had this like affinity towards programming and computer science in general. So that's kind of how it all started. And yeah, I kind of stumbled onto Bitcoin pretty early on, and like around the end of my bachelor's. And this was in around 2015, 2016. And that's when I decided to go to ETH Zurich in Switzerland to pursue a master's in computer science.
Got it. And then, when you made the move from India to Switzerland to study your master's, you kind of left halfway in the middle of it, which is almost like a big no-no in, from the perspective of like Tamil parents and families. So obviously you got into Berkeley Skydeck and Y Combinator, which are, great programs. But how did your parents take that move? And also like maybe talk about like how convinced were you that making that move was the right one for you as well?
Yeah, that's definitely that's actually one of the things that excited me. Like I'd always been an outlier in most aspects. Like the fact that I played heavy metal drums. Well, firstly picking up a musical instrument. I picked up the drums of all instruments. My mom hates it to this day, and she thinks I'm like a very bad person for playing the drums. Like I picked up the guitar or something. But nonetheless, like the same way as soon as I went to like do my master, like I'd already studied in Germany for a while and then in China for like I'd moved abroad and like met a bunch of different folks from different backgrounds and stuff. And at that point, I already kind of knew that like I didn't want to be one of those dudes that just ended up at a desk at Facebook or Google, working for this like salary, like living like the very normal mainstream settled life. Like my brother was doing that already. Like he's still doing that. He lives in Silicon Valley. Like he works at Nvidia, and he's doing well. But I kind of knew like that's not what I wanted to do. And in that regard, I started working with a startup. Like even before I joined my masters, I started working with a blockchain startup at the time, and that kind of gave me like a very deep insight into two things. Like the first one was about like blockchain and Bitcoin in general, and the other one was about like what it takes to build a company like from the ground up. Like today, that's the company's still going and they're like, doing pretty well, but like those two factors kind of persuaded me. Like it made me think that if I did end up finishing my master's degree, like it's very, I mean, it would have been very likely that I'd be sitting at Google Zurich today, like working like a normal desk job. And I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. And so I had like a whole bunch of ideas that I wanted to try out. And it was a massive leap. Like it was a massive leap of faith for me in like trusting myself and my abilities to build a company. And like in hindsight, it's probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. And to my pleasant surprise, like both my parents and my brother like extremely supportive of it. Like to this day, like they don't fully understand what I do. Like they have no idea what Bitcoin is, or like any of that stuff. But they were, I mean, they're super orthodox folks, by the way. Like they've never left the country. Like they're like super, super Tambram. And they're like, they're extremely risk averse. But in this regard, they were like, okay, this guy seems to know what he's doing. Like he's smart enough to figure stuff out on his own. We're just going to let him do it. And like, if we say no, he's not going to listen anyway. So they were like extremely supportive. And even to this day, like, I mean, they have what I do. So.
So yeah, like Annie, you kind of talked about, what prompted your interest a bit. But like what really got you excited about, the premise and, the vision for, Bitcoin, like, the other cryptocurrencies and just blockchain in general? Like what gets you excited about that future?
Yeah, I mean, so like I mentioned, I started working with Bitcoin pretty early on, like from a like developer perspective. Like, so I kind of had an understanding of how the technology worked, like what was interesting about it, what was exciting about it. But like the reality of like why this thing is amazing, like why I wanted to like dedicate the rest of my adult life to working on this stuff was what really happened when I like kind of experienced those pains firsthand. So when I did move abroad to Switzerland, like I went all alone, and I had to like kind of figure out a lot of stuff on my own, and like within Switzerland, there's not that big of an Indian community. Like, I mean, making friends was hard. So, like, even like for basic thing, like if I wanted to open a bank account, who would I go talk to, stuff like that. Or, like, I started to do a lot of that stuff on my own. And while I was doing all that, like, it really struck me, like this is like Switzerland is one of the most financially advanced countries in the world. Like, it's like the hub of all the big banks and all the money. And even there, like opening a simple bank account, like just pay for my daily expenses, I didn't just pay my own tuition. Like, so I was financing my own way through college, and like paying my own tuition was just absurdly hard. Like, there's no easy way to even move money like from India to Switzerland. And I was like, well, okay, I'm just going to try doing like it makes so much sense to use Bitcoin to do this, and I ended up doing that. And when you make your first Bitcoin transaction, like when you make a cryptocurrency transaction, you like the reality. I mean, it just kind of hit me like, holy shit, this thing is the way this works is like it's completely permissionless. Like there's no single person that controls it. Like the reality of like what that word decentralized actually means kind of hits you. I mean, it's like a buzzword that's thrown around all the time, but like the fact that I didn't have to go to like a company or a bank or someplace and open an account before I could get Bitcoin and buy it and sell it and things like that. Like, so that's when like this is insanely powerful stuff. And then like from a tech perspective, it was just it was the most exciting thing I was working on. So like, I mean, this is something I want to learn more and more. Like, and I just fell into the rabbit hole and never looked back. I mean, the kind of the stuff that we use today is like some pretty advanced Bitcoin protocols and stuff, but back then it was just like falling into the rabbit hole. Just haven't looked back since.
Yeah, even something like Coinbase, which obviously makes it as easy as using Robinhood or one of those other tools to buy cryptocurrencies, is kind of crazy when you think about. I remember when I first kind of looked into it, there was a few platforms. I wasn't super early, maybe like 3-4 years ago, and even like kind of how easy the user experience was not that great. So it makes sense why something like Coinbase took off. You kind of talked about that decentralized kind of concept, and it's a buzzword, people don't understand it. And then you actually got a practical, experience, kind of experiencing what it actually meant, where like you were in Switzerland, the financial capital of kind of the world, where, people think banks and stuff, they think of Switzerland, and they still made it hard for you to move money from India to Switzerland. And then the ability for you to kind of, not instantly, but maybe relatively easily move money from India to Switzerland with, through Bitcoin must have been like, pretty remarkable. So I guess for yourself as well, like, do you look at Bitcoin and, Ethereum and things like that as, a tool or also kind of an investment? Like, have you like personally bought Bitcoin and Ethereum, and if, why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, I wanted to mention, like, it's interesting that you mentioned Coinbase, because this is like a very relevant story, like, as well. Like, so going through like Coinbase is also a Y Combinator company, and like he had like Brian from Coinbase is like, I've never met him personally, but then like from what I've heard is like this insanely smart dude, basically, like who back in 2012, I think 2012 was when they finished YC. And like at that time, like when he was pitching the idea for Coinbase, nobody thought it was cool. And like he was literally giving away Bitcoin to people like at demo day, like handing people free Bitcoin and like, say, like this thing, here's like one Bitcoin, you can do whatever you want with this. This is how it works and how cool it is. And nobody bought the idea, like, oh, like this thing is going to fail. And then today they're the company as big as Facebook. But, like that's a very similar relatable story to that extent. And like to the second part, no, like I like since day one for me, like ever since I started playing around with Bitcoin, it's always been about like, I mean, what really excites me is the way it works. Like as an investment, I mean, yeah, I do hold some cryptocurrency, but like that's really not the end game for me. Like the price changes so much, and like people around me like always talking about the price, and I think that's kind of where a lot of the hype comes from. But outside of that, like if you really think about it from like a macro perspective, like if every single person on the planet was just concerned about the price and like held on to Bitcoin because they all thought they're going to get rich from it, and nobody did anything useful with it, the price would quickly drop to zero because people will start to wonder like, why is this thing valuable? And the reason it's valuable, like if you actually look back at when it was first invented and published on the internet, it was created as a form of peer-to-peer electronic cash, which is effectively a means of settling transactions between peers across the globe, between anybody who had access to an internet connection, like without any middlemen whatsoever, right? And that vision is still like yet to be realized on a global scale. And I think that's kind of what really excites me. And like I want to like try to contribute as much as I can towards that.
Got it. It's interesting, Kai, you mentioned the Coinbase story because there was an investor, I forgot his name. I think he was something at Y Combinator as well. And I think he gave them like 200,000. Like, I think they sent him a cold email. They kind of talked about what Coinbase was. And the reason he invested was because he had trouble easily buying Bitcoin. Because I think the user experience was so bad. And then, Coinbase and like the early beta or like version of it, I guess he saw it and he's like, you know what, this is going to be huge. And he gave them 200,000. I think his investment's worth like $1 or $2 billion now. It's like some crazy amount. So yeah, you're definitely right. A lot of things that are kind of on the fringe. There's another product I think of too. Do you remember that drink that's like for developers where if you want something that's nutritious, but you don't have time to eat, but you want something that's still, what's that product called, Tito?
I actually have no idea. That sounds like a very Silicon Valley thing. I genuinely have no idea.
So it's the same thing. I think like I remember like a developer friend of mine was drinking that and I was like, this is crazy. Like this is like something straight out of like a sci-fi movie. But later, like I think 2-3 years later, it became mainstream. It became like a massive company. So definitely something there. In terms of between Bitcoin and Ethereum, what do you see as a difference between them? Like the common thing that I hear is Bitcoin is store of value. Ethereum is kind of the gas for transactions in the future. Is that something that you would see as accurate?
Not entirely. Like, no, I wouldn't agree with that. But I mean, it's very easy to get wound up with these like internet debates about how this like between these coins, and most of them usually stem from a perspective of price and which one the party that's arguing for or against it thinks is going to go higher up in value. But from a utility perspective, like, or the reason they exist is, so Bitcoin has a lot of shortcomings. By no means is it perfect. Like it was invented as peer-to-peer electronic cash, and like as soon as it was put out on the internet, like as soon as Satoshi put like whoever this person is like put this up on the internet, the very first comment was like, we very much need a system like this in the world, but I don't see this thing scaling up to the needs of 7 billion people on the planet. And that's a very true statement, right? And Ethereum so Bitcoin intentionally has a bunch of limitations. The way it works makes it hard to use and stuff like that. So Ethereum kind of came up with this idea of like it took away a bunch of limitations and reimagined a few fundamental concepts of Bitcoin and the way, for example, like Bitcoin is a double entry bookkeeping system where like you have just transactions, inputs and outputs, and Ethereum is like an account-based system. And that allows for different types of things that can be done with Ethereum that you cannot do on Bitcoin. For example, you can run a program on the Ethereum blockchain, like as long as you're willing to pay for it, you can run anything you want. Like, I mean, you can run like a counter that counts like from 0 to like a billion or infinity, like as long as you're willing to pay for it. But something like that on Bitcoin is impossible. So this opens up a bunch of use cases with Ethereum that are just not possible with Bitcoin, and that in turn like opened up more use cases. Like for example, like when he mentioned store of value, like I'm not sure what that actually means, because like again, that's like something that's tied 100% to the price of Bitcoin, which means you're assuming it's going to become extremely valuable, and like that's why you want to store your value in it, which I'm not sure. Like, I mean, nobody can predict what Bitcoin. I mean, it's deflationary, but you can't say like it's going to. I wouldn't consider it a sound investment. Like, it's risky for sure. Whereas with Ethereum, it opens up like all these crazy possibilities to build like other also like financial tools, like for example, decentralized finance, like building wealth products, interest generating products, like lending markets, borrowing markets, issuing coins. Like it opened up a whole bunch of different use cases that were just like those are things that Bitcoin is not suited for. So they're like inherently different ideas and different perspectives on two different problems entirely. Like, so Ethereum is not trying to be peer-to-peer electronic cash, like although some people use it. Like, so there are different ways, entirely different ways of looking at this.
For me, I'm more personally excited about Ethereum than Bitcoin, but I feel like obviously Bitcoin is what is commonly put out there in the media. So why do you think people don't talk about Ethereum as much, even though the applications like practically are way more like there's way more possibilities with Ethereum than there is with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, so this is like exactly like so people usually go down the route of like choosing something that solves the problem for them. Like you probably like Ethereum because like it does something for you. You saw some cool application or something that kind of like caught your attention. That Bitcoin, like Bitcoin's boring, right? It's just like I mean, in a very dry sense, it's like yeah, it's cool. I mean, in the beginning, it was like the only one before Ethereum came out. Like that's when it was like extra exciting. But now with all like we have like I don't know like a million different coins, each of which claim to do something different. Like there's 100 different applications. So everybody has their vice and like something about something of like some blockchain or cryptocurrency attracts them towards it. So that's kind of why they're all, I mean, the space is kind of fragmented in this way. Like people are more drawn towards something that they find useful or cool. Whereas like, and the reason Ethereum's not as famous or popular as Bitcoin today is just a test of time. So like Bitcoin's like, it's like the internet basically, like, right? Like you had, I mean, so Bitcoin was like the granddaddy of all cryptocurrencies and the idea like of what a blockchain or decentralized systems mean in itself. And it's been around the longest and like it's probably not been broken. Like nobody has been able to break it or like find a fault in the system. And Ethereum's like still a bit newer, but it's like it's just cool younger brother. So maybe in like 10 years, who knows? I mean, maybe it's Ethereum that's like the most famous one or like the most widely used one or something else.
Yeah, and you talked about, Bitcoin, and you were like, it's not clear what you meant by store of value. What I mean by that is, I guess there's a certain group of people and even companies that are purchasing Bitcoin and keeping it in their treasury is kind of a hedge against, inflation. Like they believe that the governments, especially in the US, Canada, et cetera, Europe, printed off a lot of money to help keep the economies going. And at some point that's gonna, come back and bite all those economies in the butt. And
Mm-hmm.
having something like Bitcoin in your treasury, like your company treasury, instead of cash, which is losing value because a lot of it's being printed, is kind of the strategy. So that's kind of what I meant by store of value. It's supposed to be kind of replacing what most people think is like, what gold was before Bitcoin came. It's like the digital gold for like maybe, um, millennials. But again, it's to be seen. But you're right, it's much more boring than Ethereum. But yeah, why don't we kind of get into the company? We talked a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
cryptocurrency, blockchain, et cetera. So, Lastbit, you kind of talked a little bit about why you started the company, but why don't we kind of go back to that and, just recap why you started Lastbit, and then we'll kind of delve into the Y Combinator experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, yeah, speaking about Bitcoin and blockchain, like we could speak for hours on this topic. I mean, that like on a lot of the stuff you said, like I would love to just chat about this kind of thing. I mean, it's probably like one of the most exciting things that's happening, and like I love getting your opinion, like the way different people look at it, and yeah, there's hours and hours of content on just that alone. If anyone's interested in that,
Yeah.
but yeah, coming back to last bit. So yeah, like I was like I told you, right? I did play the drums for a while, and like when I moved to, so after my bachelor, I moved to Germany for a while, and then I found this death metal band, and like that was always my dream to play in a death metal band, and like this was a European band, like kind of like just ticked all the boxes, and it was like the best time of my life. Like got to meet these cool people and like play music and study at the same time. So I was like, just like doing everything I wanted to do with my life, and um, around the time I started the company as well, we had like I had this opportunity to go on like a European tour where we played like 8 or 9 different countries, and we were like we just drove across Europe and playing shows every day. And at this point, it was like super apparent that okay, like doing, I mean, like this is a real problem. Like in my head, it was a problem. I knew the problem and like I knew I wanted to solve it, but I didn't have the courage like to actually go to like the administration, like, to the I forget what the office is called, but like to the office in my university and tell them like, hey, I'm gonna deregister, and that was kind of like the tipping point for me. Like so when I realized like, well, I'm spending like 80% of my time like outside of university just working on like I was working on this on the side among other things, and like I was spending more time working on like this kind of stuff as opposed to like university course. I'm just like studying for exams, which was and like my course was focused on artificial intelligence. So I dabbled in that for a bit as a research assistant, but like it wasn't as exciting as this. And like it was just like the most obvious thing to do. But then I mustered up the courage to like actually go and deregister. And finally, I just ended up pulling the plug and like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And I talked to my parents about this. Like, I just go ahead, do it. It's all good. So I didn't have anything to hold me back when I went about doing this. And I knew that. So I knew the problem I wanted to solve. I'd seen firsthand like this other startup that I was working with, like how this guy built a company like from the ground up. Like it was a pre-seed stage company. They raised like $400,000 at the point when I left. But I was like, okay, if this guy can do it, I can most definitely can do it myself. But obviously the future was like a bit uncertain. Like I still needed to figure out like how am I gonna like, okay, now I'm gonna get kicked out of Europe. I need to go back, build a prototype, like meet investors, raise a company, like build a team, and all that stuff. So that was like kind of the early days, like the super early days.
Okay. And then, you got into a prestigious, program in Y Combinator, which, people know, it's a brand name, everyone who's kind of in the startup world, especially in North America, know the name. And you got into it, which is, it's like, I think harder to get into Y Combinator than I think to get into Harvard was the stat. So, you got in. So tell us about that whole experience in terms of, the application process, like being in the program, the value that you've seen in the program.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one great way to describe it. Like a very recent description I saw of YC was something that stuck with me. It's kind of like Hogwarts for startups, and it's very, very true. Yeah, so as soon as I started the company, like I kind of knew like YC was something that I really, really wanted to do, but I just never felt like we were ready enough. Like you said, it's one of this like it's like the holy grail. Like every startup wants to go there, and I always thought like I'm just another dude with an idea. Like what makes me special? Like I don't think I would get in, but in hindsight, I should have just applied. Like that should have been the first thing I did, but that's something you learn the hard way. But the application process is it's kind of like what you see online. So you basically like what they're looking for is our founders or yeah, they're mostly focused on like really focused on founders and like certain companies. So they do know that like 90% of like the companies that apply are like these super early stage companies that like just like do people with ideas and probably don't have like a real product or like real users and stuff like that. But there are exceptions. But so yeah, like the majority of our application and data is focused on like us as founders, like who we are, like what makes us special, like why are we building this, why do we believe in it, and yeah, the process is like you submit an online application like with just your idea and like a bunch of details about the founders, like the company, just basic stuff, and then if they like it, you get a 10-minute interview. Like I think like I forget the stats. Like I think like 10% of all applicants get this interview, and then in that 10-minute interview, like I think like 1% of them actually make it past. So like the odds were super slim, but for us, like I mean, we were just pumped that we even got to that interview stage, and when we did that, I mean, those 10 minutes were like me and my co-founder prepared like really, really. I mean, we spent a lot of time preparing for it, and it went great. And after that, the YC experience was like it was unforgettable. Like it literally changed the trajectory of the company, and it changed us as founders because what they kind of do is you're in a group of like extremely smart people, all of whom are really, really motivated to build like the next $100 billion company, and that just makes you as a human being, like you naturally want to compete and like try to be at a higher level than everyone else. And like it brings out that spirit in you. And the things that you learn during YC, the things that they teach you are the absolute most relevant things like that are all meant towards pushing you towards getting to that like massive, like you have to build a match, like it's high risk, high reward sort of thing. Like, and that gets drilled into you, like you make these big decisions and big moves. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you learn something.
I love the description as a Harry Potter fan that it's the Hogwarts of the startup world. Interesting story about Y Combinator. I mean, there's a lot of them about it, but I read about when Airbnb went public. I think they got into the Y Combinator program, and I think they gave them a certain amount of money to wipe out the debt of one of the founders or something like, or the debt of the company. I think it was like 6% of the company. And obviously, once it IPO'd, I think that turned into like some crazy number. I don't know what the exact number is, but maybe it was $1 billion. So that's like the craziest return of like a $60,000 into $1 billion. So Y Combinator has done really well. You talked about kind of the founding team. So when most people think of kind of building a startup, finding your team is typically hard because, you're building something for the next 5-7 years until you kind of get something somewhere, right? Like realistically. So whoever you kind of build a team with, you got to really have some kind of, chemistry with them. So how did you and your co-founders come together? And tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think like, and that's like the number one thing behind any great company. Like it's usually a function of how the co-founders do in the early days. Like if there's, and like the biggest reason companies fail or like early stage companies fail is really not because of like competition or like the company running out of money. It's almost always because the founders like were not the right fit, or the founders just gave up and like went to do something else or whatever. But so I was like super fortunate in this regard again. I mean, like the early years of the company was just myself. I mean, I had like I've always been like the solo person. Like I love doing things by myself, and like I was pretty good at like doing everything like from start to finish. But then things did like I was always looking for a co-founder, and like when I was at Berkeley, I was fortunate enough to meet this guy. His name is Bernardo. He was graduating from the Haas School of Business, and he was just finishing up his MBA. He'd come from like a long background in consulting at McKinsey, and he was like super passionate about finance and like really loved what we were doing. And as after he graduated from his MBA, he decided to take this massive leap of faith and like rejecting a sponsorship for his MBA from McKinsey and like and a full-time job from them to like join me full-time. And we've been working together for like a year and a half or so now. And I mean, it's just been one hell of a ride. Like just like we just fit together so perfectly. And like I spent 2 years working on this by myself and then finding him. And I mean, it was like things just happened along the way for the right reasons. And it's been pretty great, like as the founding team.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And like I think you mentioned like, why most companies fail at the beginning. It's because of the dynamic between co-founders. Like I think the number one reason companies fail in their first 5 years, I think it was like something related to like founder conflict. I think it was, because it's a hard thing to do, build a company. It's like you're pretty much married from a business point of view, right? So it's definitely a hard thing.
Yep.
One of the interesting things I found, like when I was kind of doing a bit of research on like your company as well, is one of the investors in your company was Charlie Lee, who is a founder of Litecoin. Sorry. How did you get him as an investor?
I mean, that's actually like, so we were in Vegas for a conference, like we were attending this money. We were like in town for a different conference, like this was a fintech conference. And at the same time, like on those exact same days, there was the Litecoin conference going on, like at a different hotel in Vegas. And we were like, okay, we need to crash this. Like we didn't have tickets, like we didn't even know what was happening. Like when we were there, we were like, holy shit, this thing's happening. Charlie Lee's gonna be there. Like, and we all knew who he was. Like I was like, man, I just need to like tell him about my idea and like see if he's gonna be interested in it. And like we were like, we kind of like crashed our way into the conference. Like we just put in like fake passes, walked in, and we met Charlie, and he was super nice guy, super down to earth. He was willing to have a chat with us, and kind of got him on Telegram and just texted him like back and forth, like telling him like, hey, this is what we're working on. Does this sound interesting to you at all? And like, and then we went back to San Francisco and I met up with him for coffee like the next week. And like within a weekend, he said like, okay, I want to invest some money in the company, and like this is how it's gonna go. And like in 2 days, we signed a safe note, and yeah, super easy, super chill guy to work with.
That's awesome. I like the initiative of faking the passes. So you guys did a safe with Charlie then to kind of start off with.
Yeah, that's right.
Got it. One thing I want to kind of mention to anybody kind of listening right now is, if you have any questions, feel free to kind of send them over via the chat or, because we're not really looking at Facebook Live, unfortunately. But, if there's some questions you send that we aren't able to answer today, we'll get them over to Prashanth and maybe he can kind of answer them separately. One of the things I wanted to kind of ask was around, Lastbit, and COVID. What's been the impact, whether it's positive or negative, of COVID on, the trajectory or, where your company is going as Lastbit?
I mean, it's a bit of, I mean, it's definitely been a positive impact for us, like as a company, and like personally, it's not as positive, I would say. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but well, basically, like, yeah, I came back to India last March, exactly around the start of COVID, and that's when everything happened. So like outside of the founding team, we're actually a pretty small team of like 7 folks, but like at the time we were like 4 people, and all 4 of us decided to like get a house in Bangalore and like live and work in the like as make it our office/living space. And since then, we've actually just been like stuck in the same place. Like we've all been living and working together, and like we built this amazing team dynamic, and like so work wise, we're just working like all day every day, and I mean that's been great. So that we've been able to push things forward really, really. We launched our products; they're doing well. We just closed like a huge round of financing, and like so the company's been like it was like the company's doing great. Like, and we were fortunate enough again that COVID didn't like directly impact the business, given that it's like an online it's a payments application, so it didn't like have too much of an impact on us. But yeah, obviously, like personally, like we've just been like kind of stuck in lockdown. We don't get to do anything else other than work, which is not the worst thing, but yeah, it would be nice to go out once in a while.
How does Lastbit make money? Like, what's your revenue model? Is it just like a transaction fee, or is there like a subscription?
Yeah, as of today, it's pretty simple. Like you can think of it like sort of like PayPal, where we just charge a small transaction fee every time someone moves from Bitcoin to euros or vice versa. But like to the long-term vision, I mean, this again, like what we have live today is like a proof of concept that's just meant to show that, hey, this thing actually works, and we're able to convince banks and Bitcoin exchanges to work with us. But yeah, the long-term vision, the revenue model is slightly different.
Got it. And then like in terms of, life outside of work, because, work is definitely important. You're building something you're very passionate about, but what do you like to do for fun outside of work? I know things might be limited in Bangalore right now and kind of, what's happening there, but typically what do you like to do for fun outside of work?
I think like at this point, like in my life, like I have like three things. Like one is like working on like a bunch of hobby projects. Like I love tinkering with hardware and have a whole bunch of like side not side like these small projects, like stuff I can build around the house. Like we built like a bartender, like a machine that just dispenses drinks, like with that's powered by Bitcoin, like a skateboard, like just random stuff, like hardware stuff like this. The other one is drumming. I still play the drums like pretty actively, and been picking up the guitar recently as well. I have a small YouTube channel where I like upload drum covers, and the last one is basketball. I mean, but yeah, I got injured a few years back and just haven't been able to play since. But yeah, those are like the outside work.
So fun fact before we kind of jumped on this, Prashant told me, which I found crazy, is that his favorite basketball team growing up was the Toronto Raptors. As a diehard Raptors fan, I'm very happy to hear that we have an international following. And I think you said Vince Carter and Chris Bosh were two of your favorite players. Crazy.
Still are.
So you must have been ecstatic. Was it 2 years ago? Oh, felt like a lifetime ago, but when we won the championship.
Yeah, that was pretty cool to see. Like, that was definitely amazing. I mean, that was unexpected to some extent, but it was. I watched every single, like me and my dad were actually sitting at home, like watching every single one of the finals matches. It was awesome.
I should actually create a YouTube channel of my wife took videos of me reacting very passionately. We'll call it that. Reacting to all the crazy games. You should have seen me after Game 7, the Kawhi shot, and some other like shots, during the finals too. But definitely that championship will last a decade. In my mind, I'm not like worried about the Raptors. In terms of like learning, like you seem like someone that's kind of always learning and striving. Is there like a book and or like podcast that you've kind of listened, like a book you read or a podcast you've listened to that you has really made an impact on yourself personally or professionally?
Yeah, actually, like there's like the most recent book I read just like last week. It's called The CEO Within by Matt Mockery. It's not a very famous book of any sort, but it was something that like folks within the YC community were talking about, and man, that thing like it really changed my perspective on like doing management, like growing a team, like the way you handle things within a company, and like it's all the things that you think are. I mean, it's all the things that you think are true, but you wouldn't implement them because you're not 100% sure. And then when you read them in this book, like it's like, yes, I always knew this. Like this is the right way to do this thing, and like it definitely changed my perspective on like on running a company. So, highly recommend that to anyone.
And how about podcasts?
Actually, I can't think of it. Yeah, I mean, I don't listen to podcasts like religiously. Like, it's mostly on and off, like stuff that I hear bits and pieces of, but yeah, I can't think of one that's memorable that just sticks out at the top of my head.
Okay, and then in terms of like if you had a kind of if you had a chance to sit down with 16-year-old Prashanth, what would be something that you would say to him?
Well, I think I generally do not have like zero regrets per se, but then like if I had to do things over again, I would probably do it a little bit differently. And like yeah, I think that to answer that question, I'd probably try to start running a company like earlier on in my life, because I did not need the validation from universities. Because in hindsight, those degrees or like certificates of paper are like serve me no purpose, and I know like this is what I'm going to do for the next like 20 years of my life at least. So like I just wish I would have liked to have started doing this earlier on.
Do you think the future of school is going to change? Like you made that comment, and I personally feel the same way as you. I know there's probably been some benefit to kind of what I've done in school, whether it's meeting people or some kind of interest it sparked in me. But do you see the future of school changing drastically, or sorry, education?
It's very hard. I was actually having a very intense discussion with my best friend about this a few days ago, and like while there's this huge room for improvement, and there's like definitely like new things coming out. Like I think it's not going to change drastically. It's going to evolve slowly. Like this is like a massive change. Like it's almost like uprooting of the financial system. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but like over the next 10 years, things are going to be definitely going to be way different from the way like it was like when we went to school. Like online learning is a thing now, that's accepted, and it's perfectly normal way to learn things that you're interested in. Um, but yes, it's very hard to say like what exactly will change. It's very easy like to shun a degree out and say like, hey, like university sucks, but that's not for everyone, right? Like some people kind of learn early on, like, hey, this is like the right thing to do, and it's not. But uh, yeah, like I don't think there's a binary answer to that. So it's definitely going to change, but I think it's going to be a gradual change over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm very super fascinated by this change because it kind of plays into kind of the decisions you made in kind of forming Lastbit. Like you left in the middle of your master's program to start it. And I just feel like looking back, I kind of figured I wanted to do certain things by a certain age. And I kind of just did school just to have that piece of paper as kind of a backup.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the future of school, I think will be like, instead of paying a large amount of money for doing 4 years of school, it might be like bite-sized courses. Like instead of doing all these unnecessary courses, very specific courses to what you want to do, it might be a bit more practical. It might be shorter. And also like I was I was one of those students that didn't go to class. While people are like in class, I would be learning or trying to learn the material offline or like, and I would try to be like, I tried to go to school just for socializing and like building relationships and connections. So I don't know if that was like the right or wrong thing, but I feel like there's a group of people like me. So in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like yourself as well, in terms of like a personal legacy perspective, like how would you want your friends and family to describe you?
So this is yeah. I think the simple answer to that is like I want them to like not describe me, but something that I've built or like something that I've done with like the years of existence that I existed for. Like I don't want like my existence to be meaningless in the fact that I mean spent like the entirety of my life until now like mostly studying and learning stuff. Now I just basically want to spend the rest of my life like putting all that learning into like practical usage that does something like that changes the way somebody does something, and like it's ideally something that I like doing as well. So while it's easy to say like I'm going to fix global warming, that's not my thing to fix. There are people who are way more passionate about it to fix it, but I definitely do want to like keep building things that like I eventually strike that one thing. Like hopefully it's Lastbit, but it's one of those things that just changes the way people look at a particular fact. I mean, a facet of their life. So yeah, it's only like remembered in the sense like you build something that just lives on for like 100 years or so.
And for you, what's like a failure, like, maybe you call it learning lesson that you've, experienced in the last like 5 years that you've kind of really learned from?
I think it's definitely like this answer is pretty easy because it's definitely like determination and grit. Like though, like it's to learn like building a company is super high risk, and like looking at folks that I went to school with who've now graduated I mean, not all of them are doing better or like they're all doing different things. Like some people, I mean, it's very easy to like look at the safer path and like wonder like what would happen if you're taking that and like, but like staying, but like just being determined, like continually pushing forward what I wanted to do and doing it on a daily basis without like ever giving up until now is something that I definitely had to learn. It was more like out of necessity that I learned it than choice, but it's been a great learning experience.
Do you ever kind of get founder envy when you're kind of building like Lastbit and like, especially since the kind of the environments you're around where you're seeing other people, maybe it's friends, family, etc., building, companies that are like, bigger than you or significantly bigger than yours, like today. Like, do you ever get founder like envy or like questioning yourself, like, why am I working on this? I should be building that. Like, do you get that? Or like, if you do, how do you internally deal with that?
I think having time to like worry about that is a luxury. Like I definitely do understand early on. It's very easy to get stuck into that loophole and like compare yourself against other startups, and it happens all around. Like especially when you're in this startup world. Or, like I mean, you see other founders all the time. Like you see like an agriculture startup comparing themselves to like I don't know like a space to company, and like it just makes no sense. And that's more to do with like founder ego and yeah, it's a luxury to be worrying about things like that. And like honestly, I learned again like one of those things like looking at that just makes no difference. Like my day-to-day job, like every single waking second, my job is to make this company a success and like fix things that are broken on a daily basis. And things are broken on a daily basis. So worrying about what another company is doing is mostly a luxury. Like obviously like analyzing competition, like learning and strategizing, that's a different thing, but that's not in the bucket of like comparing yourself to other companies. And yeah, I generally don't care much about like what I mean, I again like from strategy perspective, of course, I'm always aware of what other companies are doing, but like comparing myself like to other companies is just I don't really care enough.
And I know you're super passionate about this space and what you're building. And I always like to like ask my like founder friends, etc., about this question. Do you have a particular number or like some kind of financial outcome you hope to get? You don't have to say a number, but like, is there a certain kind of financial outcome or goal that you have for working on Lastbit, or is it, it's like a nice to have, but right now you're just like, you're just enjoying what you're building. Like I'm always curious, like which, like it's always like for me personally, there's always something I need to strive for, whatever that is, to kind of help me get through the grind of building something for 5, 7, 10 years. So I'm just curious about your mindset.
Yeah, this is actually the same answer as before. Like, I mean, the financial goal is a nice to have, and it's usually a side effect of success. And I definitely do want to see the company like become a super valuable, like massive company. And the only way it's going to become massive and valuable is if it solves a real problem for real people at the end of the day. So I want to build this to a point where it's like just ubiquitous and everyone's using it, everybody loves it, or like it's solving a real problem for many people. And by by default, that just means that it's going to be a huge, massive, valuable company, which by default again means it's like going to be like $100 billion company if you want to put a number to it. But that's not like I don't look at it as I want to make this $1 billion company plus, or like that's not a driving factor at all.
Got it. And the last question I want to leave off with was, for the folks listening, or who will listen, what advice would you give to any aspiring entrepreneurs out there that you want to leave a message to or for? Sorry.
Uh, well, every single person. This is like something I've also observed with a whole bunch of friends and like folks that have regular day jobs. It's like everybody has an idea. Like everybody has like all these fantastic ideas. Like it's easy to look at Coinbase and say like, oh, I had that idea at that point. Like I knew it. I was like the first one, but yeah, but you didn't build $100 billion company. So, I mean, if you have an idea, like you think it's always going to be a massive risk. There's never going to be a day when you're going to be comfortable with like, okay, I'm going to like pursue building or like doing something about this idea that I have. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, that word actually has no meaning. It's like if you have an idea, just go do something about it instead of saying it's an idea. Like that's probably the only advice.
And it's a great way to kind of end off, strong message to the audience. I think it's, taking action definitely is a big thing. I hear a lot of people talk the talk, but not walk the walk. So love the
Mm-hmm.
message, Prashant. So, we want to thank you for kind of, for those of you listening, tuning in. And, be sure to visit tamilculture.com to network and collaborate with Tamil innovators worldwide, like Prashant. And thank you, Prashant, for being involved in this event. Be sure to check out the amazing work that Lastbit is doing at lastbit.io. Like Prashant said, this is what I would call like a super trend. It's not going anywhere in terms of cryptocurrency and all the things we kind of talked about. So yeah, so thank you again, Prashant, and thank you for joining us today. So see you next time for those of you listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.